Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. And today, we're going to start off just south of Orikhiv. We're going to discuss this ongoing Ukrainian offensive operation. We're also going to talk about the Russian offensive operation into the northeast of the current theater of operations as well. So we have seen reports that the Ukrainians are claiming success in this ongoing military operation in the south. We've talked about the multiple Ukrainian brigades that are deployed in this area, while at the same time there are other content providers discussing the fact that, or their perceived fact, that the Ukrainians have achieved a breakthrough south of Orikhiv. So let's try to analyze what we are seeing and what we are looking at. So this map, and I've said this a number of times, tends to be a Ukrainian tilted map. It's probably one of the better maps that are out there, and usually even this pro-Ukrainian mapping service updates eventually correctly once it becomes clear what's happening on the ground. Now, they're a little slow at it sometimes. Yeah, I would say so, depending on what's happening. They tend to gravitate towards prudence if the Russians achieve a victory, whereas the Ukrainians achieve some sort of victory. They're very quickly to modify the map. Now, case in point is what's happening south of Orikhiv. If you look here, this would appear that the Ukrainians have achieved a breakthrough very close to the main Russian defensive line. Now, do we have video evidence that supports this? So we're here at July 24th, 25th, 26th. So they're declaring this area gray areas. They're not saying it's controlled by the Ukrainians. They're saying it's contested. 27th, and this is where we're at now. So this essentially would be kind of a curve in the main Russian defensive lines. And there's additional lines. There's about 3 defensive lines in this area, running about 20 kilometers. Now, what we've seen, the video evidence that we've seen thus far that indicates this is a disputed zone, is an individual Ukrainian armored vehicle. One vehicle. It looks like a tracked vehicle, and you can see it go into a trench and then make its way out of the trench. It's one single vehicle. I'm guessing that armored vehicle is simply lost. It's not part of some concerted Ukrainian operation to make territorial gains. You don't do that with one vehicle. Now, again, the reason I say that vehicle is lost, and in all probability the Russians are looking at this one vehicle and thinking to themselves, well, is it worth disclosing our position? Is it worth taking out this vehicle and destroying it? There's only one vehicle there. Why is there only one vehicle here? And the Russians are probably coming to the same conclusion. It's lost. And eventually 2 things are going to happen. It's going to turn around and go back to the Ukrainian lines, or B, it's going to continue south and eventually hit a mine, or it will be taken as a war trophy. They'll be captured. Look, one armored vehicle is not a threat to the main Russian defensive belt in Zaporizhia. It's just not. So one of those two things would, in all probability, happen, and it's already probably happened. And we'll probably get an update on that at some point. Now, if this would have been multiple vehicles, platoon, company-sized element that was conducting a probing attack south of Kharkiv in this area, I'm guessing the situation would have looked a lot different. We would have probably seen those vehicles being engaged by Russian forces. One lost vehicle, and you can tell. You just know that, okay, what is this? What's one vehicle? Why is there one vehicle? I don't know. Usually you're operating in a platoon-sized element. Where there's one, you're going to see 3 or 4, possibly 5. And then that platoon element is operating in a company-sized element with around 10 to 15 armored vehicles. And that company-sized element obviously is part of a battalion, which is going to be made up between 30 and 60 vehicles. And then that battalion is going to be made up of a brigade set of multiple battalions. So I hope this is a reasonable explanation on what we were seeing in regards to that one vehicle. You just don't see one vehicle. I have seen many times at the National Training Center at Fort Irwin, California, when I was in the military, during training exercises in Fort Hood, Texas, in the 1991 Gulf War. Vehicles get lost, and that's what it looks like. You don't operate with just one vehicle, especially tanks, armored vehicles. You're conducting something called bounding overwatch. Bounding overwatch means that one section of the platoon is moving forward, or one platoon is moving forward, while another platoon is covering those vehicles. It's just something you don't see in regards to one vehicle capturing this area. It's not how it works. And you can't then state that, hey, the Ukrainians have taken this area because we've seen one vehicle roll through an anti-tank ditch or a trench or whatever that was. Now, look, if I was seeing the same thing to the north in this ongoing Russian offensive in this area, would I say the same thing? Absolutely. Yeah, one vehicle does not mean you're taking control of territory. And the Russians are continuing their offensive operation in this area as well. We'll kind of go back and look at what has happened over the last few days, do a little time lapse so you, the viewer, can see exactly what's happening in this area. Because this is an important area of the conflict that here in the mainstream media, they're not covering it. And that's kind of where we are at right now. Now, it is interesting that at least this mapping service is saying that there was a breakthrough here. What is this? Adia. And if you look at it, if we go back, just a rough guesstimate. So 2.8 kilometers. Yeah. So they pushed forward, probably engaged resistance, fell back. They're still retaining this area here. Yeah. So interesting. Now we do understand this is probably looking quite a bit different than what we're seeing on this map, but we'll continue to cover and report on what's happening in this area. We talked about earlier that the Russians are continuing to upgrade their attack helicopters. And what they're doing is they're making their helicopters, be it Mi-8s, the K-52s, even the Mi-28s. They're putting targeting systems on these helicopters that gives these helicopters the ability to launch the medium-range tactical missile, the LMUR. LMUR. And that system has a range, if fired from an airborne aircraft, of over 14 kilometers, 15 kilometers. It's a very much a system, as I've talked about yesterday, like an oversized Israeli Spike. It is not wire guided. I do not believe it's wire guided. It is has a data link, or one of the versions of the variants has a data link. It can be, again, used fire and forget or fired with man in the loop. So essentially, what makes this so deadly for the Ukrainians is if we go back to the, let's say, these contested areas where the Ukrainians are fighting, and let's say we go into this open field and we go back, and that's 13 kilometers. So essentially, these Russian helicopters are able to loiter a kilometer behind these main lines, well out of range of Ukrainian man-portable air defense systems, which would be operating in this area. And they are able to fire these systems, and I'm guessing, well, I'm not going to guess, I'm just going to say it. I think in all probability that these LMURs have a range greater than 14 kilometers. I would say with a data link they could probably go 20 kilometers. And we're probably going to see upgraded versions of those LMURs coming off the production lines, being fielded by Russian forces. But these systems, in conjunction with the Zala Lancet 3, probably Lancet 4, 5 variations now coming out, are being used with a high degree of lethality and the ability to destroy even the most heavily armored Western armored vehicles. Look, we've seen a rear side aspect hit by a Lancet 3, or a Lancet, Zala Lancet, impacting on a Leopard 2 main battle tank. You can clearly see it hits the right rear of the turret, penetrates, and then completely goes through the vehicle. The shape-charged warhead goes through the vehicle. You can see the variations of smoke. You can see there has been an actual penetration of that vehicle, and it goes right through it. And at the same time, the Ukrainians are using similar systems, Brimstone. We don't believe they have a lot of those systems, but nonetheless, the British have been handing over those Brimstones, which I would say are comparable to the LMUR. Obviously, the Brimstone is much more advanced, but then the question is how are the Ukrainians firing the Brimstone? From what systems? Again, usually the Brimstone 2, is launched from an aircraft. It's difficult for the Ukrainians to maintain aircraft near the line of contact. So even in the case of the Ukrainians launching Storm Shadows, it's just a very few aircraft that the Ukrainians are able to sortie against the Russians. Probably less than half a dozen sorties per day, where the Russians, we're seeing between the high 30s upward to 100 sorties per day by Russian forces against the Ukrainians. So that's where we kind of set for today, again, I would highly recommend, if you are a Ukrainian supporter and you're hearing about these quote-unquote breakthroughs of the main Russian line, I would take it with a grain of salt. Again, that hasn't occurred yet. Okay, we have not seen the primary Russian defensive belt be penetrated by Ukrainian forces as of yet. There's been Ukrainian activity near this main belt, but again, evidence indicates it is not a very large fighting force. In fact, one vehicle. So that's kind of where we sit. So we will continue to cover. We will continue to report. I will be departing the Parasite Palace here in a couple hours, actually, and heading back to the home base. And I'll be more happy then. So thanks for joining us today. More to come very, very soon. And as always, have a good day.